What happens inside your body when you lie? What is the real price your cells pay every time you swallow your rage or betray someone's trust? What if every moral choice you have ever made were etched into your biology, functioning as a record you cannot erase? The answer to all of this already exists, and it did not come from religion or philosophy. It came from an artificial intelligence called Axiom, which cross-referenced 300 terabytes of information, from ancient Vedic treatises to recent research in epigenetics and neurophysiology, with a single goal: to find the exact point where an abstract concept like sin becomes a concrete alteration in living matter. Most people grew up hearing that karma is a kind of cosmic court, an invisible judge keeping score of what you do right and wrong. Did something good, here is your reward. Did something bad, a mysterious boomerang swings back and hits you. That is a comfortable story, the kind you tell a child so they do not take what is not theirs. The problem is that the ancient texts never talked about magic. They were describing a complex biochemical process. They just did not have the scientific vocabulary to name what they were seeing. That mystical version falls apart when you look at the data. Karma as supernatural revenge does not exist. What exists is a biological recording protocol. Your body is a high-precision recorder, a black box that documents every action, thought, and emotion, all of it. This process operates at the level of carbon, hydrogen, and the electrical impulses running through your nerves right now. When you do anything, help someone or betray a friend, your brain fires a specific electromagnetic impulse. For a long time, science assumed that impulse simply dissipated, like ripples in a pond fading away. But in a closed system, energy does not vanish. Think of someone screaming inside a concrete room. The sound hits the wall, bounces back, hits again, and with every rebound it intensifies. Human biology follows the exact same logic. When you lie, your body records a microstress. You might not even notice. Your mind is good at making excuses, at calling it a harmless little fib. Your body, on the other hand, does not negotiate. The instant someone acts against what evolution hardwired into us, as the gears of collective survival, empathy and cooperation, there is a voltage spike across the neural networks. It goes beyond fleeting nervousness. It is a burn at the microscopic scale. Neurotransmitters cascade and trigger a chain reaction. We tend to think our actions are external events. I pushed someone. It happened out there. I took what was not mine. Objects shifted in the world. But the data shows the opposite. The primary reaction always happens inside. There is a direct correlation between moral choice and the state of cellular membranes. An analysis of more than 50,000 medical records, cross-referenced with the patient's biographical data, revealed a pattern that is hard to ignore. People marked by constant aggression, buried resentment, or a routine of deception show identical cellular damage across the board. The same mark, in thousands of different bodies. Researchers call it self-aggressive resonance. Every action of yours carries a frequency signature. Generosity vibrates in one range, betrayal operates in another, much lower and far more chaotic. DNA is not that static little ladder from your high school textbook. It is an oscillating circuit that receives and transmits signals all the time. When you generate the frequency of a betrayal, you are not just harming another person. You are sending a scrambled signal straight to the nucleus of your own cells. That signal stays there, recorded, with no expiration date. For decades, science believed DNA was fixed, that you were born with a set of genes, and that was it. That idea collapsed. Research in epigenetics proves that DNA is dynamic, rewriting itself all the time under the influence of internal and external factors. The most powerful factor capable of altering that record is your own choices. The illusion we carry around is thinking we can do something and move on, leave the act in the past. For biology, the past does not work that way. What exists is a continuous present, sealed into the shape of your proteins. Repeated negative patterns act on the genome like a slow, invisible, silent radiation. You think you are just feeling envious of your neighbor. At that very moment, your blood is flooded with cortisol and noradrenaline, blocking the production of leukocytes, the cells that protect you from disease. That tall tale you told your boss? Right now, your blood vessels are going through a spasm that reduces, by a tiny fraction, the oxygen reaching certain areas of your brain. Sounds like nothing. Stack that up for 10-15 years, and the bill comes due. It is neutral, just like gravity. Nobody picks a fight with gravity because they fell, and complaining about karma because a betrayal turned into disease 10 years later makes the same amount of sense. None. Karma works like the physics of structural resistance. Hit a wall with a hammer every day, the wall cracks. Hit your own DNA with low-frequency vibrations for years, and it starts to deform. Where exactly is this record stored? Where does the body keep the information of everything you have ever done, thought, and felt? The answer lies in the molecule you carry in every single one of your 37 trillion cells, DNA. But it is not just the architectural blueprint of your body. It is also a library with an absurd storage capacity. 1 gram of DNA can hold 215 petabytes of data. To put that in perspective, that is all of the information on the internet packed into something smaller than a sugar cube. Until recently, geneticists only paid attention to exons, the stretches that code for proteins. That accounts for about 2% of the genome. The other 98% was labeled junk DNA for decades. Evolutionary leftovers, remnants of ancient viruses, pointless repetitions. A deeper analysis of those regions showed that arrogance came at a steep price. It is not junk, it is an archive. Within those stretches, there are complex patterns that change over the course of a person's life. Think of DNA as a vast library, where the genes for eye color and height take up a few shelves, and all the remaining space is filled with event logs. Intense emotion, prolonged stress, an act of violence against yourself or another person, everything leaves a note there. The mechanism that writes those notes is called methylation. Circling around the DNA helix are tiny molecules called methyl groups, made of 1 carbon atom and 3 hydrogen atoms. They act like switches. When a methyl group latches onto a gene's promoter, that gene is silenced. It does not disappear, it does not break. It is still fully there, but it is turned off. The cellular systems that should read that gene and produce healthy proteins skip right past it as if it did not exist. What controls these switches? The biochemistry of your emotional states. Take someone living a double life, cheating on their partner, embezzling money at work, or simply pretending to be someone they are not, day after day. On the outside, everything is fine. On the inside, permanent mobilization. The endocrine system dumps a constant cocktail of stress hormones and adrenaline into the bloodstream that the body interprets as a continuous threat. That cocktail alters the electrical potential of the cell nucleus, and that alteration sends the methyl groups into action. Axiom's analysis shows that under prolonged exposure to guilt and fear of being found out, methylation hits precisely the promoters of immune defense and tissue regeneration genes. The body starts shutting down its own repair systems. You lied and, without knowing it, blocked the gene that should have destroyed a cancerous cell that appeared 5 minutes ago. You betrayed someone close, and your biology recorded the instruction to cut serotonin, throwing you into years of a sadness that seems to have no reason. There is one gene that deserves special attention, P53. Biologists call it the guardian of the genome. Its job is to find cells with damaged DNA and force their destruction through apoptosis, the defective cell self-destructing to protect the rest. It is the main shield against tumors. In people with buried chronic guilt, this gene's promoter shows up completely covered in methylation stamps. Sealed shut, the guardian is blind and tied down. The logic is heavy, but it makes evolutionary sense. In nature, an individual who perceives itself as defective represents a risk to the group. Evolution built into us a response to the signal, "I am a mistake." The body begins dismantling its own defenses. If you carry guilt that gnaws at you non-stop, the most primitive part of your brain reads that as a death sentence, and the body obeys. And there is another path of destruction happening at the same time, chronic inflammation. When someone carries a heavy secret, the body stays on an alert that never switches off. Elevated cortisol even during sleep. That hormonal backdrop pushes the immune system against the body itself. Defense cells receive the wrong targets. Methylation blocks the genes that should have put the brakes on inflammation at the right moment, and the result is arthritis, lupus, thyroiditis. The person goes from doctor to doctor. Nobody finds the cause. The cause is that lie from 10 years ago, carried in the chest like an ember that never goes out. 87%. That was the correlation found in patients with aggressive forms of cancer. In most cases, there was a period of self-condemnation between 1.5 and 2 years before diagnosis. The epigenetic tags need that time to accumulate and fully shut down anti-tumor protection. The molecular pathway is traceable. Guilt triggers spasms in zones of the hypothalamus, alters the production of neuropeptides that drop into the bloodstream and reach the cell nucleus. There, they influence enzymes called DNA methyltransferases, the workers who place the marks. Under the signal of guilt, those workers operate fast and without criteria, slapping silence onto the most vital stretches of the genome. It is as if someone walked into the control room of a factory and started flipping the circuit breakers off one by one. The structure still stands, but inside everything begins to shut down. But those marks do not stay confined to a single body, and that is where things get truly heavy. These marks that leap from one body to another tell a spine-chilling story, and we will get there. Before that, there is a question that needs answering. How exactly does a feeling, something you cannot even hold in your hands, turn into a specific disease? Axiom's analysis translated human emotions and actions into electromagnetic frequencies measured in hertz. Every emotional state has its own signature, a pattern the body broadcasts inward and outward non-stop, like a radio station that never goes off the air. First, anger. There is a popular myth that letting anger out is good for you. Vent it, scream, punch a pillow. But when someone experiences a fit of rage, even if they hold it in on the outside, the brain generates a chaotic, high-amplitude signal. The human body is about 70% water, and the frequency of anger scrambles the molecules of that water inside the cells. Masaru Emoto, a Japanese researcher, spent years photographing water crystals exposed to different emotional stimuli, and the crystals exposed to aggression completely lost their form. The DNA molecule has a property called the piezoelectric effect. It reacts to electromagnetic fields. The frequency of anger enters into resonance with the hydrogen bonds that hold the double helix together. Think of an opera singer shattering a crystal glass with nothing but her voice. The right frequency at the right intensity shatters the form. Chronic anger does something similar to the genome. After repeated episodes of rage, microfractures occur in stretches of DNA that control cell division. The damage is physical breakage, different from a mutation in the classical sense. When those stretches are damaged, the body loses control over which cells multiply and which should stop. Chronic anger, by this pathway, is essentially an open invitation for a tumor. Now, lying. Here, the signature changes completely. Anger is an explosion. Lying is something else. It is distortion. When you know the truth but say something different, your brain produces two signals at the same time. One from memory, with what actually happened, and another from the speech center, with the fabricated version. Those waves overlap and create destructive interference. That is the physics you learned in school. Two waves out of phase, one cancels the other. In the moment of the lie, you are canceling part of your own bioelectric field. A person who lives in constant deception carries that internal noise all day long. I have to admit, when I first stopped to think about this, I thought it was a stretch, until I looked at what happens to the proteins. Ribosomes, the cellular factories that assemble proteins, start receiving scrambled instructions because of that signal conflict. The result is defective proteins, amyloid plaques in the brain, linked to Alzheimer's. Deformed collagen fibers that accelerate aging and destroy joints. Lying physically warps the body of the liar, in the literal sense of the word. Then there is the most treacherous one of all, chronic guilt paired with shame. The frequency range of these states is extremely low. While joy and love vibrate above 150 Hz, guilt and shame drag the body down to 30, sometimes 20 Hz. At that range, it is as if a parking brake were pulled on the entire biology. The movement of cytoplasm inside the cells slows down, metabolism drops. The phagocytes that should be devouring viruses become sluggish and nearly paralyzed. A body locked in that wave of self-criticism begins treating itself as an invader. That is where autoimmune diseases are born, the body attacking the thyroid, the joints, the skin. The message, "I should not exist," translated into cellular language, and the body obeying. All of these signatures share one thing in common that makes everything worse: the cumulative effect. A single lie, the body absorbs it. Lie every day for 10 years, and the distortion becomes structural. Each repeated negative emotion leaves residue in specific zones. Anger targets the liver and gallbladder. Fear takes its toll on the kidneys, and this is not a Chinese medicine metaphor. It is spectral tissue analysis data. Lying blocks the heart and lung region. At the points where this residue accumulates, conductivity changes. The brain's electrical messages stop reaching the organ efficiently. The organ becomes increasingly isolated, and an isolated organ starts to deteriorate. That is how a chronic disease is born. Most people ask, why did this happen to me? From a physics standpoint, the more useful question would be a different one. What frequency have I been broadcasting over the past few years? Because we are frequency generators. When we generate the frequency of disintegration, we are not being punished by anyone. We are simply tuned to a range where things fall apart. Genes switching on and off based on your emotions. You can look at all this and think, if I take care of my choices, I am safe. But biology does not respect that individual boundary. You are not the beginning of your story. You are the continuation of one that was already underway long before you were born. For generations, science believed there was a wall between the parent's experience and the child's body. They called it the Weissman barrier, the idea that at fertilization, all epigenetic marks were erased. A clean slate. Axioms analysis, cross-referencing the genomes of 3,000 families with medical records and biographies of ancestors from the early 20th century, showed that this cleanup has serious flaws. Certain marks are protected from erasure, and they are not random. They are precisely the ones that record the most violent traumas and the heaviest emotional breakdowns. Nature preserves this information on purpose as a danger alert for the next generation. Look at what happens with a man who committed a brutal act of violence in a state of desperation. In that moment, his body was flooded with fear and aggression neurotransmitters on an off-the-charts scale. That chemical storm altered the configuration of microRNA in his sperm. MicroRNA are tiny molecules that work as messengers. They do not change the gene sequence, but they change the way genes are read. It is as if the musical score stayed the same, but someone scribbled wrong instructions in the margins. And those instructions were passed on to the son. Raised by a loving family in a safe environment, the son may never know what his father did. Even so, from childhood, he exhibits anxiety that nobody can explain. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, runs in overdrive for no apparent reason. He spends his life waiting for a threat that never comes, paying a bill he never signed. Ancient religious texts said that the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. Everyone always treated that as a figure of speech. Embryology shows it is pure biology. When your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, inside your mother's fetus the eggs were already forming, and from one of those eggs came you. 3 generations, grandmother, mother, and you, existed as a single biological organism at the same moment. Any hormonal shock the grandmother suffered hit all 3 layers at once. People with unexplainable phobias and pain that no scan can detect were analyzed on a large scale. The pattern is enough to turn your stomach. The symptoms mirror traumatic experiences of their ancestors. One case that really got under my skin involved a patient with choking attacks and panic episodes that always started around 3 in the morning. No doctor could find the cause. When the family history was traced, the connection appeared. The great-grandfather had participated in violent interrogations using suffocation in the 1930s and lived with smothered guilt and dread of being discovered. That fear was inscribed in the methylation of genes regulating the respiratory center and sleep cycles. 80 years later, the great-grandson wakes up at the same hour, feeling the same shortness of breath. He is living in his body the nightmare of a man he never met. This changes what we understand about justice. My life, my rules make sense in a legal context. In biochemistry, the more accurate statement would be, my life, the consequences of decisions made by people whose names I do not even know. And it is not just fears that travel between generations. Behavioral patterns also ride the DNA. If your grandfather resolved conflicts with aggression, there is a real chance that the excitability threshold of your prefrontal cortex, the region of self-control, is genetically lower. For you, holding back an impulse takes more physical effort than it does for someone whose family does not carry that mark. You are not to blame for carrying that programming. The responsibility, however, is yours. Something that showed up in the data works like this. If an ancestor survived because of a morally questionable act, stole food from someone who was starving, reported a neighbor to seize their property, the body recorded that behavior as an effective survival strategy and passed it along. The descendants of those people may feel an irrational pull toward hoarding resources at any cost, or a strange ease with deception, without understanding where it comes from. Those people did not choose to be this way. They became hostages of a programming that saved the bloodline in an extreme moment, but now, outside that context, only causes damage. Nature does not forget. If the balance was not restored by consciousness, it will be collected by the body in the form of disease. That collection does not stay confined to the inside of the body. It spills over into the reality around you. The organism breaks down inside when the frequencies are off, sure. But biology does not end at the edge of the skin. It keeps interacting with everything around you. And this is where it takes on a dimension that, personally, took me a while to accept. Quantum physics works with the idea of a probabilistic field. The world is not a solid, predictable mass. It is an ocean of simultaneous possibilities, finding money on the ground or losing your wallet, meeting someone who changes your life or falling for a scam. All of those options coexist. What determines which one becomes reality? Your signal. The frequency your DNA broadcasts works as a filter, selecting among millions of scenarios the one that matches the pattern you carry. Axiom cross-referenced data from people who describe themselves as chronically unlucky with their psycho-emotional profile. Those who carry markers of hidden aggression or guilt in their DNA collapse the possibilities at the negative point every time. Someone who stole 10, no matter the amount, generated in that moment the frequency of scarcity, that feeling of, I do not have enough, I need to take it by force. That frequency got recorded. The DNA starts broadcasting the signal that the world is a place where you lose. And the person, without realizing it, keeps choosing the path where they will be robbed, the bank that will go under, the investment that will tank. In relationships, this becomes ruthless. A woman leaves a marriage with a violent man, swears never again, and a year later she is with someone worse. There is an electromagnetic signature of submission carved into her DNA, sometimes inherited from her grandmother. That signature emits a signal picked up only by those with the complementary frequency, the aggressors, lock and key. In a crowd with 1,000 decent men, the woman carrying this marker does not notice them. They do not resonate. The instant someone with an oppressive profile appears, the fields sync up. It feels like passion. In practice, it is wound recognition. When you hurt someone, you create a connection that physics calls quantum entanglement, linked particles. The victim's suffering reaches you regardless of distance. You could be on the other side of the planet sunbathing and suddenly feel unexplained anguish, chest pain out of nowhere. The channel is working, and there is no buying your way out. Rich people build temples, make donations, set up foundations. If the gesture is born from fear, the frequency does not change. The universe reads vibration, not stated intention. And when all that damage concentrates in a single person with power over millions of lives, the genealogies of the 20 most bloodthirsty dynasties in history were analyzed, from the Roman Caesars to the dictators of the 20th century. The pattern is one of accelerated collapse. Entropy, the measure of chaos, skyrockets in those bloodlines. Where normal evolution pushes toward complexity, in a tyrant's clan the opposite happens: rapid simplification and destruction. First comes the physical signal. The Habsburg jaw, that deformity made famous in portraits, was always attributed to intermarriage. The intermarriage existed, but as an instrument of something greater. The frequency of absolute domination interferes with the fetal bone formation. Along with the deformity came hemophilia, epilepsy, mental disorders. When a lineage spills too much blood, it loses the ability to maintain its own, the clotting factors blocked by epigenetics. Nature working to shut down that genome. Then comes the madness. Ivan the Terrible killing his own son in a fit of rage, Caligula making a horse a senator, dictators giving orders to armies that no longer existed. The human brain was not designed to withstand the concentrated field of hatred from an entire nation. Mirror neurons, even in an individual who suppressed empathy, keep receiving pain signals. The prefrontal cortex burns out like an overloaded fuse. Finally, the most definitive of all, the lineage ends. The reproductive viability of tyrants' descendants plummets by the second or third generation. It is evolutionary quarantine, nature isolating what it considers too dangerous to continue. The extremely rare descendants who escaped that fate did one thing only. They broke with everything, changed their name, changed their country, dedicated their lives to service. Only a radical cut from the ancestors' frequency allowed them to rewrite the biology. Empty thrones and interrupted dynasties fill the history books. Each one of those interruptions is a fuse that worked, protecting the species from a concentration of destruction that, if it kept reproducing, would have taken everything down with it. If destruction operates with that much force, is there an equivalent force capable of rebuilding? The answer is yes. The rebuilding mechanism obeys the same physical laws as the destructive one, only with the sign flipped. Cases of people with terminal illnesses who healed without medical explanation were analyzed together. Science usually calls this spontaneous remission and files it away. But the data tells a different story. The common denominator had nothing to do with diet or medication. It had to do with a radical shift in the individual's frequency. It starts with the telomeres, those protective caps on the tips of chromosomes. They work like the plastic tips on a shoelace, preventing the genetic material from fraying with each cell division. Over time, they shorten. Stress and chronic cortisol accelerate the process. When they run out, the cell ages and dies. It was assumed this was a one-way street, a clock that only ticks forward. But there is telomerase, an enzyme capable of rebuilding those caps, genuinely rejuvenating the cell. What activates this enzyme most powerfully? Axiom's analysis points to something that sounds almost too naive: genuine altruism and unconditional love. Not charity for show, real care born from compassion. When someone acts this way, the brain releases oxytocin and vasopressin, which combined with specific neuropeptides create a command that switches on the telomerase gene. Damaged chromosomes begin to be repaired. Evolution built in this deal. Help others, and your body gets extra time. Utilitarian biology at its purest, with no moral varnish whatsoever. Remorse and guilt are not the same thing, and confusing the two comes at a steep price. Guilt vibrates at 30 Hz, the range that paralyzes immunity. True remorse, what the Greeks called metanoia, that genuine turn of consciousness, is a leap to 500 Hz. When someone acknowledges an error without making excuses, the brain enters gamma synchronization, an electrical discharge that cuts across both hemispheres and burns through the old neural connections. New pathways begin to form. The methylation marks that were suffocating vital genes come loose, because the high frequency destabilizes the chemical bonds. It is a biological reboot. Forgiveness works on the same principle. Not the superficial, "it is fine, forget about it." Real forgiveness is ripping out the emotional splinter lodged in the chest. In people who went through genuine processes of forgiveness, cortisol dropped 50% within 1 hour, and immunoglobulin A, the first line of defense against viruses, tripled. The body, freed from the weight of holding the grudge, redirects all its energy toward regeneration. Think of a case to see how this plays out in practice. A 35-year-old man, healthy, career on the rise. A promotion opportunity shows up, but to get it he needs to take down a colleague who is also a friend. He falsifies a report, the friend gets fired with his reputation destroyed, and he lands the position. On the outside, victory. On the inside, an explosion of beta rhythms in the brain, alarm. To muffle the conscience, the body dumps cortisol and noradrenaline. He mistakes it for the adrenaline of a winner. Over the following months, deep sleep drops 40%. He starts waking up exhausted, drinks more coffee to compensate, but chalks it up to the pressure of the new role. Cellular membranes harden from chronic cortisol, exchange fewer nutrients, and accumulate toxins. Within the first year, methyl groups are already silencing defense genes. More colds, new allergies. No doctor connects one thing to the other. By the third year, his DNA transmits the frequency of betrayal as its default signal. His wife, with no idea what he did, feels the distance. Conflicts begin. A nodule appears on the thyroid, benign for now, the knot in the throat, the truth he can neither swallow nor spit out, turning into matter. By the fifth year, business partners betray him back, a mirrored situation. He loses money, position, reputation. Instead of seeing the symmetry, he sinks into rage. His vibration drops to 20 hertz. P53, the guardian, is completely blocked. The nodule receives the order to transform. Cancer cells begin to divide. By the seventh year, the diagnosis. He is lying in a hospital bed thinking life has been unfair to him. He cannot see the thread connecting it all. Doctors talk about genetic predisposition and stress. Correct, but only seeing the surface. The line connecting the falsified report to the hospital bed is 7 years long and passes through every gear we have been following. Impulse, frequency, methylation, boomerang, collapse. But that story could have gone differently. What if in the third year, when the marriage started cracking and the nodule appeared, he had stopped, sought out the friend, asked for forgiveness, tried to make amends, come clean with his wife? The frequency of remorse at 500 hertz would have burned through the cortisol bridges. Oxytocin and endorphins would have stepped in. The marks on P53 would have come loose. Lymphocytes would have resumed attacking the nodule before the transformation. Within 6 months, it would have disappeared. The family would have rebuilt itself. The same biology, the same person, the same life, with a completely opposite destiny. One moment of choice, 2 completely different endings. Those 2 possible endings leave a question hanging, and it may be the heaviest one from everything we have been following. If biology, physics, and history conspire to make this system of consequences work with such precision, what is the point of it? Why did evolution build a being so vulnerable to its own conscience? What axiom concluded carries a double weight, because it sounds like a sentence and a liberation in the same breath. This whole thing works as an incubator, not a prison. Aggression breeds inflammation. Lying scrambles the neural networks, and whoever lives in selfishness keeps shortening their telomeres without realizing it. All of this, from a physics standpoint, is electrical resistance. It is friction. Friction generates heat and wears down the system. In the opposite direction, altruism, honesty, and compassion create a kind of biological superconductivity. Energy flowing through the body without losses, cells regenerating, the organism at peak performance. It is the difference between pushing a car with the parking brake on and driving down an open highway. The car is the same. The difference is what you do with it. In biological terms, the evolution of the human species is already over. We are not going to develop bigger claws or run faster. What is beginning is the evolution of consciousness. This system we have been pulling apart works as a filter. Imagine a civilization with access to nuclear energy, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, tools with creative and destructive power that no previous generation could have imagined. Put minds that run on envy, fear, and the desire to dominate in charge. What happens? The answer is on the news every week. Nature has a built-in fuse. It does not let low-frequency minds hold power for very long. That reckoning is getting faster. Over the past 50 years, the speed of the return has increased visibly. In the 19th century, the degeneration of a tyrannical family took 4 generations. Today, with information and energy circulating at unprecedented density, the boomerang comes back in years, sometimes months. We live in an accelerated age, and this age has no patience for those who insist on vibrating wrong. From the intersection of all this data emerges the projection of a new human type, an ethical human being, far from religious sainthood. This kind of person has understood that honesty is no longer a moral choice, but a practical condition for survival. They know that lying will destroy neural connections before the day is over, so they do not lie. And wishing harm on an enemy? They understand the blow to the other is a blow to their own biological field. For this person, ethics is as necessary as breathing. I will admit that when I first pieced all of this together, the feeling was strange. Like when you finish a long series and just sit there staring at the screen, not knowing what to do with everything you just took in. Or rather, knowing, but without the courage to start. There is a weight to this information that you cannot pretend is not there. At the same time, there is an enormous relief in knowing the game is not sealed, that biology responds to every move. Tomorrow morning, the first step is to see yourself as a transmitter. You are not some tiny body lost in a huge world. You are a station broadcasting a signal to 37 trillion cells and to every scenario around you. Every emotion is an instruction. Do an honest review. Remember the times you lied, betrayed, stayed silent when you should have spoken. Not to drown in guilt because guilt kills, but to use the remorse that vibrates at 500 hertz and releases the methylation marks. Call whoever needs to hear an apology. Pay what you owe. Treat mental hygiene with the same seriousness as washing your hands. We learned to wash our hands so we would not catch bacteria. Now we need to learn not to let envy, judgment, and fear into our heads. When you catch one of those red-handed, change the channel. Remember something you are grateful for: immunity working in the most practical way possible. Punishment is not part of the package. What happens are consequences. The universe works like a mirror. It returns with precision exactly what it receives. Smile at the mirror and it has no choice but to smile back. Pure physics. Back at the beginning, the question was what happens inside the body when we lie, the price cells pay for it, and whether biology records every moral choice. The answer is in your blood. Every word you speak alters the architecture of your proteins. Your children do not inherit what you say, they inherit what you feel. Every second, in every conversation and every thought, you are either building or dismantling your own structure. Physics and morality are the same thing. They always were. And now that you know, the question that remains is what you are going to do with this starting tomorrow morning. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom Investigation Project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.